Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, sleepy step back, about 5,000 years back, to the place where human civilization first started to stick together, quite literally. You're in ancient Mesopotamia, standing between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the air smells like damp earth and warm dust, and everything, the fields, the homes, even the gods, seems sculpted out of mud. You probably won't survive this world for long, honestly. Between flash floods, sandstorms, and whatever that guy over there is fermenting in a clay jar, you'd have a rough time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun seeing who's listening from where and when. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself on a riverbank at dawn. The light is soft and gold, spilling across wide plains where reeds whisper and oxen groan under wooden yokes. The soil here is a gift. It's called alluvial, though no one around you uses that word. To them, it's just the mud that keeps them alive. The rivers have been flooding for centuries, layering the land with silt so rich it feels almost oily between your fingers. When you press it, it holds shape, and something in you, some primal part, feels the tug of creation. People here have long learned to mold their world. They use mud for walls, mud for ovens, mud for gods. And one quiet morning, someone, maybe out of boredom or necessity, scoops up a handful of that same river clay, squishes it into a crude bowl, and sets it out to dry in the sun. It's nothing grand, just a container for berries, maybe water, or that questionable fermented mash again, but it's the start of a revolution. You watch them crouch, hands caked and cracked, shaping lumps of earth into something functional. There's a rhythm to it. Press, turn, smooth, sigh. A patient choreography repeated until instinct takes over. When the clay dries, it's fragile, crumbly, easily broken. But still, it's a beginning. For the first time, humans have made something both useful and beautiful that doesn't come straight from nature. They've crossed a line, stepped from gathering to crafting. Historians still argue whether the very first clay pots in Mesopotamia were born out of accident or design. Maybe someone dropped a mud brick into a fire and saw it harden instead of crumble. Maybe a child playing by the river left a clay ball near the cooking hearth. Either way, you can imagine the surprise, the delighted confusion when something as simple as dirt refused to disintegrate. That tiny accident would change everything. The village around you hums with quiet purpose. Homes are made of sun-baked bricks, patched with reed mats. The air smells faintly of smoke, fish, and grain porridge. You hear a woman calling to her children, her voice echoing against the walls. Somewhere, a goat bleats indignantly. And near the river's edge, the potters work, though they wouldn't call themselves that yet. They're just people with muddy hands and an idea. You crouch beside a man who's mixing clay with straw and crushed shells. He grins at you, his teeth pale against skin darkened by the sun. He doesn't speak your language, but the way he gestures makes the meaning clear. The straw keeps the clay from cracking. The shells make it stronger. He molds a small bowl, his thumbs pressing spirals into its sides. When he's done, he places it carefully in the sunlight, like it's something alive. As the day warms, the ground bakes. The air shimmers and flies circle lazily. You realize this quiet act of molding and waiting is one of humanity's first technologies. Before wheels, before writing, before kingdoms, there were hands and clay and time. The Mesopotamians didn't have kilns at first. They relied on the heat of the sun and open fires. It wasn't perfect. Many pots cracked, crumbled, or exploded dramatically, sending bits of pottery flying like shrapnel. The sound of a pot shattering in the fire was enough to make anyone wince. That's half a day's work gone, just like that. Yet they persisted, experimenting, improving. Humanity's stubborn streak, it seems, is older than cities. You wander through a cluster of drying pots, each one slightly different. Some are round and shallow, some tall and narrow. They're rough, streaked with the marks of fingers and the occasional stray reed. None of them are symmetrical, but they all carry purpose. A few have small scratches along the rim, deliberate patterns. Are they decoration? Identification? Historians still argue whether these marks were early attempts at symbols or just the ancient equivalent of doodling while bored. Either way, they're traces of thought, a whisper of individuality across 5 millennia. You can almost hear it, the crackle of drying clay, the soft thud of feet on dirt, the murmur of the river. There's no rush here. Every task is slow, deliberate. You wait for things to dry, to bake, to cool. Life itself is a rhythm of patience. Maybe that's why these early potters understood time differently. When you spend your days shaping mud, you learn that waiting is part of creation. As you wander back toward the river, you notice something curious. Along the bank, a few broken pots have been tossed aside. The villagers don't mourn them, they simply step over the shards. Yet centuries later, those same shards will tell archaeologists everything. What people ate, how they stored food, even what temperatures their fires reached. Each broken piece is a data point, a message from the past written not in ink but in texture. Funny how what they discarded becomes what we treasure. A dragonfly hovers over the water. The sun climbs higher, turning the mud to a blinding sheen. You crouch, scoop a handful of wet clay, and roll it between your palms. It's cool, pliant, and faintly sticky. There's a soft satisfaction in its weight. You realize the people here didn't just shape clay. They were shaped by it. Their homes, tools, art, and even their myths grew from this same earth. The Mesopotamian creation story, after all, tells that humans were made from clay, molded by the gods themselves. Maybe that's why they took to pottery so naturally. They were just repeating the divine act on a smaller scale. And maybe, as you sit here, you can feel a little of that divine rhythm yourself. The slow turn of creation, the way something soft can become strong, how chaos becomes order under gentle hands. It's almost meditative. You can understand why, thousands of years later, people still sit at pottery wheels to calm their minds. Somewhere nearby, a pot cracks in the sun, splitting with a sharp, tiny sound. The man from earlier sighs, shrugs, and starts again. That too feels timeless. Failure and the quiet acceptance that comes after. You can't rush the mud. It decides when it's ready. As the day fades, the river catches the sunset, and everything turns copper. Smoke rises from cooking fires, and the scent of baked grain drifts through the air. Someone is laughing, a rare, soft moment in a hard life. You find yourself smiling too, because somehow you know this story doesn't end here. The hands that molded these first crude pots will lead to whole civilizations of art, trade, and written record. But for now, it's just you, the river, and the quiet heartbeat of creation. The next morning comes hazy and warm. You wake to the sound of water lapping at the riverbank, the lazy murmur of people already at work. The mud beneath your feet is cool, squishing between your toes as you step closer to a small crowd of villagers. They're kneeling beside shallow pits filled with clay, hands sunk deep, churning the mixture with the same casual focus someone today might give to kneading bread dough. You realize you're watching one of humanity's oldest workshops in action. No roof, no tools, just people and earth. You crouch beside them, and instantly the smell hits you. Wet clay, a hint of rotting reeds, maybe a touch of yesterday's fish. It's oddly comforting, like a recipe for civilization itself. You watch as a woman scoops up a handful of this thick, glistening sludge and turns it over in her palms, testing its texture. Too gritty, and the pot will crumble. Too watery, and it will sag like a failed pancake. She adds a handful of chopped straw, stirs it in, then nods with satisfaction. The process is simple, but sacred. Each pot begins here, in this muddy communion between human skin and the patient soil. The villagers call it earthwork, though no written record preserves their exact words. You imagine them explaining it. The ground gives, and we give back. You feel the humility in it, the sense that humans are not above nature, but collaborating with it. Someone nearby makes a joke you can't quite understand, but you catch the rhythm of laughter. Even here, 5,000 years ago, mud is funny. Someone probably steps in it at the wrong moment. You can almost hear the groan. Humanity hasn't changed that much. As you watch, the woman presses her thumb into the clay, shaping it into a shallow bowl. The motion is repetitive and hypnotic. Press, pull, turn, repeat. The sound, soft squelches and gentle slaps, forms a slow rhythm. If this were a modern ASMR video, it'd have millions of views. She smooths the edges with a reed, dips her hand in water, and traces a thin line around the rim. You notice how she leans forward, her eyes narrowing, lips pursed. It's not just work, it's meditation. The pot begins to take form, rising slowly from formless muck. Historians still argue whether pottery in ancient Mesopotamia was first invented for storage or for ritual use. Was it about keeping grain dry or about offering gifts to gods? Maybe both. Maybe, as so often happens, utility and spirituality were two sides of the same clay coin. Either way, the discovery reshaped daily life. You can almost feel the shift. Food lasting longer, water kept cool, a sense of stability settling over human existence. It's like inventing the refrigerator, the pantry, and the Tupperware set all in one go. You walk through the workshop, and every little scene hums with purpose. One man mixes clay with ash to make it harder. A child rolls small clay beads, proto-toys perhaps, or amulets. A dog sleeps nearby, nose twitching, tail half buried in the soft dust. Every motion feels ancient and oddly modern. At the edge of the camp, you notice a pit filled with discarded clay lumps, failed experiments, cracked vessels, melted mistakes. You pick one up. It's misshapen, warped, one side blistered from too much heat. You can imagine the frustration of its maker, the muttered curses, the resigned toss into the discard pile. And yet, it's beautiful in its own way, a fossil of human persistence. The villagers mix more clay, sometimes adding crushed limestone or fine sand to strengthen it. The Mesopotamian soil is tricky, too salty in some places, too fine in others. Finding the right balance is half science, half instinct. You hear one man muttering as he mixes, something that sounds like a prayer. "Let it hold," he whispers. You don't need translation. It's the universal plea of every creator since time began. Please don't fall apart this time. The sun climbs higher, painting everything in ochre light. The clay begins to dry, changing color as it hardens. You run your fingers along the surface of a pot in progress. It's cool and velvety, but beneath the softness is potential, an object waiting to be born. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall a modern art studio, shelves lined with bowls, mugs, and vases. Suddenly, you see the connection. That urge to create something from the earth, to shape beauty out of the formless, is as old as language itself. You're part of that same lineage, separated by millennia, but united by curiosity and muddy hands. A shout breaks your reverie. Near the river, two children have discovered something strange. A perfectly round ball of clay, hardened in the sun. They toss it between them, laughing, until it breaks open, revealing a tiny air bubble inside. The adults smile, indulgent. But one old woman squints thoughtfully. She takes the broken piece, holds it close to the fire, and frowns. Maybe she's thinking what no one else has yet. Heat can change this. Maybe this isn't just mud. It's something that can be transformed. It's one of those small, invisible turning points in history. No trumpets, no monuments, just a quiet moment of observation. From that curiosity will come the first fired pots, the first kilns, the first durable containers that outlive their makers. But for now, it's just a woman staring at broken clay, wondering why it hardened. You sit beside her as the day fades, the horizon glowing with amber light. She begins to hum softly, a low, repetitive tune. The others continue working around her, kneading, shaping, smoothing, as if guided by the rhythm. There's no rush, no anxiety, just time, hands, and earth. You glance down and see that your own hands are now coated in clay. It's gotten under your fingernails, streaked your forearms. The more you try to wipe it off, the more it smears. Eventually, you give up and laugh softly. Maybe this is how it starts, the bond between humans and the land, sealed by touch. A fringe detail historians love to debate is whether early Mesopotamian potters considered themselves artists or simply craftsmen. Were they aware they were inventing something revolutionary? Or was it all just part of survival, no different from making bread or weaving mats? No one knows for sure. But looking around, watching the small smiles, the gentle concentration, the occasional hum of satisfaction, you suspect they knew. Maybe not in words, but in feeling. That quiet sense of, I made this. That's as universal as heartbeat. The wind picks up, stirring the drying pots, whistling through hollow rims. The sound is oddly musical. You imagine someone noticing this one day, tapping a pot and hearing the pitch. It's not impossible that clay led to music too. After all, the first flutes in Mesopotamia were made of reed and clay. Art tends to sneak in where function starts. The sun sets in slow motion, a red disk melting into the horizon. You see the villagers stacking their unfinished pots under reed covers, protecting them from the night dew. Children chase each other through the fading light, their laughter echoing between mud brick homes. A few older men sit by the river, drinking something that smells suspiciously fermented. One of them raises a cup, also made of clay, of course, and toasts the evening. You decide to take that as a good sign. Tomorrow, they'll return to this same muddy ritual. They'll mix, shape, wait, and hope. Bit by bit, their hands will teach the clay how to last. And centuries later, those same techniques will still echo in modern pottery studios around the world. Humanity's first great collaboration wasn't language or law, it was with the land itself. As darkness settles, the river glows faintly in the moonlight, reflecting the stars like scattered shards of pottery. You breathe in the earthy air, thick with the scent of creation. The night insects begin their steady chorus, and you can almost hear the whisper of history. This is where it all began. The next day begins with smoke, a thin gray ribbon rising from the edge of the settlement, twisting lazily in the pale morning air. It smells sharp, half wood, half earth, with a hint of something unfamiliar. You follow it, curiosity tugging you along narrow paths between mud brick huts. The ground feels baked and brittle under your feet. Someone shouts, another laughs, and the steady rhythm of work hums through the air. You find the source of the smoke near a shallow pit lined with stones. Around it, people crouch in a loose circle, peering into the glow like moths drawn to warmth. The pit is filled with dried reeds, animal dung, and bits of broken wood, all feeding a fire that crackles, sputters, and spits tiny sparks into the morning light. At first, you think they're just cooking, but then you notice what's in the center of the fire, a small bowl, dull brown and streaked with soot. Its surface is darkening, hardening, transforming before your eyes. You realize this isn't food, it's an experiment. Someone's trying to bake the earth itself. The crowd murmurs as the flames lick higher. One man pokes the edge of the pit with a stick, sending a puff of ash into the air. A woman shields her face, squinting through the smoke. The smell deepens, dry grass, hot clay, something almost metallic. The heat makes your eyes water, but beneath the sting, you can feel something important happening. The first fire isn't just burning, it's inventing. The pot trembles slightly, the fire pops. Someone mutters a prayer under their breath, and another person laughs nervously, as if trying to keep things light. One child claps her hands and says something that sounds suspiciously like boom. You decide to step back. Historians still argue whether this first firing was deliberate or an accident. Maybe a sun-dried pot fell too close to a hearth and came out harder. Maybe someone noticed that clay near the fire didn't crumble in the rain. Either way, this, right here, is how humans first discovered that heat could change matter. Not by theory, not by design, but by curiosity and maybe a little recklessness. The fire hisses as damp wood burns away. A few pieces collapse inward, smothering part of the pot. The people groan softly, but no one moves to rescue it. They just watch, waiting. There's something sacred about the waiting, like the whole world is holding its breath. When the flames die down, the pit glows faintly, red embers beneath a gray film of ash. The pot sits half-buried, smoking gently. It looks fragile, fragile enough that a single breath might shatter it. Yet, when one of the men reaches in with a stick and nudges it free, it doesn't crumble, it holds. He lifts it carefully, taps the side, and it rings. Not like metal, but with a soft, resonant sound that carries a strange satisfaction. The crowd exhales in unison. There's laughter now, cheers, someone even claps. The woman who shaped it looks stunned. Her hands hover near her chest, unsure whether to touch or just stare. You can see the thought crossing her mind. This is different. When she finally dares to pick it up, the bowl is warm, almost too warm to hold. Its color has changed from pale beige to a deep, earthy red, streaked with charcoal smudges. It's heavier now and stronger. She sets it down gently on a flat stone, and everyone leans in, admiring. You crouch closer. The surface is pitted, uneven, imperfect, but undeniably transformed. It's not just dried mud anymore, it's something new. Humanity has, for the first time, learned to use fire not only to destroy, but to create. Of course, not every attempt goes this well. A few feet away, another pit is filled with shards of pots that didn't survive. Some cracked, some exploded, some just slumped into melted shapes. The villagers pick through them, shrugging. Failure, it seems, is just part of the process. And when something goes wrong, they don't despair, they adjust. Add more straw, use less wood, dig the pick deeper. Every mistake teaches. You sit by the fire, watching another round of pots being buried under layers of burning brush. The air grows thick with heat. The flames lick upward, shimmering. The ground trembles faintly from the constant expansion and contraction of clay. A man nearby jokes that the gods are breathing into the earth. The others laugh, but half believe it. After all, how else can they explain this strange alchemy, turning mud into stone? There's a fringe Mesopotamian tale, rarely mentioned, about a god who stole fire from the underworld to bake the first offering bowls. Some scholars dismiss it as myth adapted from later Greek stories, but it's curious how fire, in every ancient culture, becomes divine. Maybe because it's both terrifying and useful, like a friend who hugs too hard. The villagers begin to experiment. Someone tries coating a pot in wet clay before placing it in the fire. Another digs a shallow trench to control airflow. These are the first engineers, unknowing, barefoot, covered in soot. You can almost see the spark of innovation leaping from one mind to another. Hours later, the fires die down again. The pots emerge harder, more uniform. When struck gently with a stick, they make that same soft chime, a primitive symphony of baked earth. The sound carries across the plain, echoing faintly. You think about how, centuries later, that same principle will give rise to bells, bricks, even glass. But right now, it's still magic. You pick up one of the newly baked pots. It's surprisingly light for its size. The surface is still warm, and it leaves a faint, chalky residue on your hands. You run your thumb along the rim and feel faint ridges where the maker's fingers once pressed. The print of a hand, fossilized in time. You wonder if the person who made it could have imagined that 5,000 years later, strangers would stand in museums and stare at pots just like this, whispering about their shape and symmetry. Probably not. They were just trying to keep their lentils dry. Historians still argue about when the first true kilns appeared in Mesopotamia. Some say around 4000 BCE, when people started controlling temperature and airflow deliberately. Others argue it happened earlier, that these open-pit firings were already the first primitive kilns. What's certain is that once the secret was out, it spread faster than gossip in a small town. Every settlement along the rivers began firing clay, making stronger, longer-lasting vessels. And with that, something subtle but profound changed. People began to trust permanence. Until now, most human creations were temporary. Mud walls, reed baskets, woven mats. Useful but fleeting. Fired clay, on the other hand, could outlast the maker. For the first time, humanity had invented durability. The woman from before, still the unofficial potter-in-chief, holds her new bowl close. You watch her fill it with water from a jug. Nothing seeps out. Her eyes widen, then narrow, and she smiles. It's a small smile, tired but triumphant. The kind of expression that says, "This will make life easier." Nearby, a child taps a broken shard against a rock, producing a clear, ringing sound. He laughs, and the others laugh with him. You can feel it, that spark of joy, that sense of "we did it." The settlement hums with quiet pride. As evening settles, the last of the fire cools. The pit glows faintly under the moonlight, a warm crater filled with possibility. The villagers begin to drift home, carrying their pots carefully. You stay behind a while, watching the embers fade to black. The air is still hot, but calm. You pick up a small shard, still warm, and turn it in your hand. It feels smooth, permanent. You realize this isn't just a technological milestone, it's a spiritual one. In learning to harden clay, humans have also learned something about themselves. That fragility and strength can coexist. That beauty often requires a little burning. You look at your reflection in the shard's curved surface, faint and distorted in the glow. You smile, whispering to yourself, "Not bad for a pile of mud." The next day dawns quieter than usual. A soft mist drifts over the river, and everything, the fields, the huts, even the air, feels coated in pale silver. You hear the faint clatter of pottery being moved, the low hum of morning chores, and, somewhere close, the rhythmic scrape of a reed tool against clay. You follow the sound and find a small group of potters already at work, their hands deep in the muddy rhythm that's shaping a civilization. They sit in a semicircle beneath a lean-to of woven reeds. Before each of them lies a lump of fresh clay, cool, heavy, and waiting. The air smells faintly of wet earth and smoke. You crouch beside them, watching as they press, pull, and shape the clay with a slow patience that makes time feel different here. You notice that their motions are not random anymore. They move with the same steady grace you might see in a craftsman who has practiced 1,000 times before. This isn't experimentation anymore, it's tradition. The oldest of them, a man with deep creases around his eyes and forearms like river roots, dips his fingers into a small bowl of water and hums softly as he works. His hands move in perfect circles, smoothing the surface of the pot he's forming. At first, you think he's just turning it slowly with his hands. But then, beneath the lump of clay, you see something round, a flat disc of wood that spins when he kicks a small stick beneath it. You blink. The potter's wheel, or at least the early ancestor of one. Historians still argue whether the Mesopotamians invented the wheel for transport first or for pottery. Some believe the potter's wheel came before the cart, and that human ingenuity began not with travel, but with art. Either way, what you're watching now is one of the most important inventions in history, born not from war or conquest, but from the desire to make better bowls. The man's foot taps the stick, setting the wooden disc spinning in a slow rhythm. The clay rises under his palms, transforming into a tall, elegant shape. His hands glide over it gently, coaxing it upward like something alive. Around him, the others pause to watch. It's mesmerizing, the quiet whir of the wheel, the hypnotic motion of the clay climbing towards symmetry. You can feel how this changes everything. Before the wheel, each pot was a struggle, pinched and coiled by hand, lopsided, often uneven. Now, with this simple spinning platform, the potter can shape faster, thinner, stronger. The difference between a crude bowl and a vessel fit for a temple offering. You crouch closer and notice something even subtler. The marks of the potter's fingers are gone. The surface is smooth, fluid, graceful. This is the first time human hands have made something perfectly round. The man finishes shaping the pot and cuts it free with a reed string, setting it aside to dry. The others murmur approval. You can tell he's proud, but he hides it under a shrug. He picks up another lump of clay and starts again. There's always another vessel to make. Nearby, a young apprentice is trying to imitate him. Her hands are clumsy, her pot wobbling dangerously as the wheel spins. The older man chuckles and steadies it with one finger. The wobble disappears. She grins, and he nods. It's a small gesture, but it feels monumental. The passing of skill from one generation to another. Civilization isn't just built by invention, it's built by memory. The work continues through the morning. You notice how each potter's style is slightly different. One prefers short, wide bowls. Another makes tall storage jars with narrow necks. Each vessel is personal, part function, part signature. Historians still argue whether the first potters thought of their work as art. But looking around, you can see the quiet pride in their faces, the small smiles as they examine their work. They might not have had a word for artist, but they understood creation deeply. You take a closer look at the freshly shaped pots resting in the sun. The surfaces glisten faintly, still slick from water. On one, you spot faint lines, spirals carved along the rim with a sharp reed. On another, small dots form a repeating pattern. Maybe it's decoration. Maybe it's an early form of writing, a personal mark, or a simple way to say, "This one's mine." Whatever it is, it's communication. Art becoming language, clay becoming story. You can imagine the first customer complaints too. Someone holding up a pot and grumbling, "This one leaks." Another insisting, "The one with the spirals keeps the grain fresher." Congratulations, you're witnessing the birth of product design and brand loyalty, 5,000 years early. As the day warms, the potters move their work to a shaded area. The pots must dry slowly, evenly before firing. Too fast and they'll crack. Too slow and the moisture invites mold. You realize how much this work teaches patience. Every step depends on the rhythm of nature, the sun, the wind, the heat of the fire. There's no rushing clay. It listens only to time. A breeze picks up, carrying dust and the faint scent of reeds from the river. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sounds blend together. The scrape of tools, the hum of voices, the faint, steady whir of a wheel turning somewhere nearby. It's oddly soothing, almost musical. You could fall asleep here, lulled by the steady breath of creation. Then, a sudden loud crack jolts everyone. One of the drying pots has split down the middle. The apprentice gasps, horrified. The old man looks over, squints, then just shrugs. "Too much sun," he mutters. "The clay wasn't ready." He picks up the two halves, turns them in his hands, and examines the fracture. You can see the gears turning in his mind, though he wouldn't know that word yet. Every failure is information. Every crack is an equation waiting to be solved. He tosses the broken pieces aside, where they'll dry, harden, and eventually become archaeological evidence for some future scholar to debate over. The apprentice sighs, disappointed. But then she sits back down, scoops more clay, and starts again. The wheel begins to spin once more. The sound blends into the rhythm of the village, the soft heartbeat of progress. A quirky historical footnote drifts into your thoughts. Centuries later, Mesopotamian potters will start using faster, double wheel systems, allowing for precise shapes and mass production. Some scholars even suggest these potters were the first to standardize sizes, ancient quality control. Somewhere in the distant future, IKEA will owe them a thank you. You look around and notice something subtle but powerful. Pottery isn't just transforming homes now, it's transforming community. The potters have become specialists. Their skill gives them status, trade value, perhaps even reverence. People bring offerings of grain or fish in exchange for new vessels. The potter's work feeds the village, literally and symbolically. And in that moment, watching the clay spin beneath practiced hands, you realize something almost poetic. Civilization itself is turning, just like the wheel, slowly, steadily, pulled forward by curiosity and craftsmanship. As the sun dips low, the potters clean their hands in the river. The water clouds with clay, a swirl of earth returning to its source. The old man leans against a rock, looking at the sky's reflection. He says something quiet, too soft to catch, but it sounds like thanks. Maybe to the river, maybe to the gods, maybe just to the mud itself. You sit beside him, feeling the last warmth of the day fade from the air. The wheel rests silent now, its shadow long across the ground. You touch its edge and feel the faint grooves worn into it by use. The world has changed again, though no one here fully knows it. You look at the man's hands, cracked, lined, beautiful. The same hands that spin mud into memory. You think about how, one day, long after he's gone, archaeologists will find his pots buried in the soil, still whole, still carrying the imprint of his fingers. Clay remembers what people forget. You lean back, listening to the steady lap of water and the faint echo of spinning wheels in your mind. The night comes gently, folding over the village like a soft blanket of ash and stars. The firelight flickers, and you breathe out, slow and even. Everything in this world is still rough and fragile, but it's spinning toward permanence. Morning light spills gently across the village, revealing a quiet pattern of order and routine. Clay pots, drying from yesterday's work, stand in tidy rows near the kiln. Some are smooth and plain. Others bear faint lines, swirls, or dots pressed into their soft surfaces. To a modern eye, they might look like simple decorations, but to the people of this age, these marks are whispers of identity, memory, and meaning. You move closer, brushing away a thin layer of dust that has settled overnight. The air smells faintly of ash, clay, and sun-warmed reeds. Beneath your fingers, the patterns come alive. Spirals like coiled snakes, zigzags like river waves, tiny punctures in neat sequences. You can almost imagine the hands that made them, pressing carefully, rhythmically, with the quiet focus of someone who understands that beauty is its own kind of usefulness. A woman crouches nearby, tracing her finger along the rim of a half-dried bowl. She isn't shaping it now, just thinking. The reed stylus in her hand is worn smooth from use. After a while, she leans forward and presses its tip lightly into the clay, marking a curved line, then another. When she lifts her hand, a pattern has formed, a gentle wave running around the vessel's side. You realize she isn't copying anyone. This design is hers. Her little boy toddles over, curious. He points at the pattern and giggles, pressing his tiny fingertip beside it. She laughs softly, but doesn't wipe it away. When the pot dries, the print will remain, a memory hardened by fire. Thousands of years later, an archaeologist might find it, puzzled by the small dent among the careful waves. They might note it as an imperfection, but you know it's something else entirely, a fragment of family. You sit for a while, watching more potters at work. You notice how each has a preferred motif: triangles, loops, repeating lines. Some press rope into the clay to make texture. Others carve shallow ridges with bone or shell. These patterns aren't random. They're the birth of style, the earliest language of design. And yet, there's something deeper here too. Many of these people can't write, not yet, but they understand that marks can hold meaning. Some of these patterns might represent ownership. This jar belongs to me. Others might signify origin. This pot was made in this village. Over time, these marks will evolve, simplify, regularize, and eventually become symbols. From decorative impressions to proto-writing, the journey begins here in soft clay. The woman finishes her bowl and sets it aside to dry. She takes another lump of clay and begins again. This time, she presses a small stamp into the wet surface, a carved piece of wood with a geometric symbol. The mark is clean and deliberate. She's repeating a design, not drawing it freehand. You realize she's invented a shortcut, a way to replicate her sign quickly, the first branding tool. From this tiny innovation will someday come the cylinder seals, small, intricately carved stones that merchants roll across wet clay to mark ownership or identity. They'll become status symbols, works of art, even personal signatures. But right now, it's just a simple stamp in mud, made by someone who probably never imagined her idea would ripple through millennia. The air grows warmer. Flies buzz lazily around the drying pots. Somewhere nearby, a child calls out, and a dog barks once before settling again. You notice that the potters aren't working in isolation. They talk as they shape. Their stories flow as steadily as the wheel turns. A man laughs, describing how his pot cracked because a goat stepped on it before firing. Another teases him for leaving his work unattended. Their laughter rings soft and easy, weaving through the sound of scraping clay. You begin to notice something else: repetition, not just of shape, but of rhythm. The way a potter's hands move, the timing of their breath, even the marks they make, all fall into a kind of pattern. It's hypnotic. Creation here isn't rushed or frantic. It's slow, meditative. You find yourself breathing in sync with them, your own thoughts smoothing out like wet clay beneath a steady palm. Across the village, a new sound interrupts the calm, the deep, echoing thump of a pestle striking grain. A woman is grinding barley beside a cluster of finished pots. You notice one jar is painted with a band of dark pigment near the rim. It's subtle, earthy, almost hidden unless the light hits it right. Someone has discovered that mineral dust mixed with water leaves color when fired. Another small revolution: paint. You watch her scoop the powder carefully, dipping a finger to test its hue. She smiles, satisfied. To her, it's probably just practical, a way to identify her jars among many. But to you, it's art in its earliest, simplest form. Color as identity, as story, as joy. Later, when the sun begins to slide westward, the village gathers near the kiln. The new batch of pots is ready to fire. They load them in carefully, layer by layer, stacking smaller vessels inside larger ones. Each one bears its own unique mark, its whisper of individuality. Someone murmurs a prayer to keep the fire steady and the clay strong. Even here, craft and faith mingle, each pot a small offering to survival. You sit near the kiln, feeling the growing heat against your face. The flames flicker through the narrow openings, painting the air with dancing light. As smoke curls upward, you imagine time folding over itself, the present moment pressed between ages like a thumbprint in clay. You think of how fragile these vessels are when new, how easily one could shatter in your hands, and yet how enduring they become once fired. Long after the potter, the village, the language are gone, the pots will remain. When future archaeologists brush away the dust of centuries, they won't find the people, but they'll find these marks: spirals, dots, lines, traces of fingers. They'll study them, sketch them, label them with careful tags in museums, but they'll never quite hear what you hear now: the soft murmur of conversation, the scrape of reeds, the low hum of contentment. These sounds, these quiet human moments, will vanish. Only the clay will speak. The kiln glows orange as dusk falls. Shadows stretch long across the village, bending over the drying fields and cracked riverbanks. Someone brings out a jug of beer, passing it around. The potters drink, laughing softly, wiping sweat from their faces. They talk about tomorrow's work, about how to make a better glaze, a finer edge, a more perfect curve. One man gestures at the patterned pots cooling near the kiln. "People will remember these," he says with an easy grin. The others laugh, not taking him seriously. They don't know how right he is. You look around once more. Every mark in the clay feels like a message, an attempt to be known, to say, "I was here." These patterns in the dust are more than decoration. They are fingerprints of thought, of culture, of the human impulse to leave something behind. As the night deepens, you lie down near the glowing kiln. The ground beneath you is warm. Crickets sing softly in the reeds, and a faint breeze carries the scent of baked earth. You close your eyes, half dreaming, half awake. In your mind, you see the spirals and dots and waves blending together, spinning slowly, endlessly, like the wheel itself. You realize that in these quiet patterns, pressed into soft mud thousands of years ago, rests the first whisper of art, of writing, of memory. And as sleep begins to drift over you, you feel a deep, steady comfort that even in dust, humanity finds a way to speak. The smell of cooking drifts through the morning air, grain simmering, onions frying on flat stones, a hint of sour beer bubbling in clay jars by the wall. You wake to the sound of laughter and the clatter of pots, a familiar symphony of domestic life in ancient Mesopotamia. Around you, families move with sleepy efficiency. A mother stirs porridge in a soot-blackened bowl. A boy pours water from a narrow-necked jug into a basin for washing. Every vessel here is made of clay. It holds water, grain, stew, oil, milk, or dreams, depending on the day. These pots aren't art for art's sake. They're the backbone of daily survival. You run your hand along a large storage jar, feeling the faint grooves left by a reed-wrapped hand centuries before. Inside, barley grains whisper softly as you shift them. The people trust these pots more than they trust the weather. A cracked jar means hunger. A well-fired one means life through the next dry season. You follow a woman as she carries a shallow tray of bread dough toward a brick hearth. She balances it effortlessly on her hip, chatting with another woman grinding spices nearby. The pots around them vary in size and shape: wide bowls for kneading, slender-necked jugs for oil, squat jars for fermenting beer. Each has a purpose, a place in the quiet choreography of household life. Then, as the morning stretches on, you notice a subtle shift. Some villagers head not toward their homes, but toward the temple that rises at the heart of the settlement, a stepped ziggurat of mud brick and reverent dust. And they carry pots too, but these are not for soup or grain. Their surfaces gleam faintly, polished with care, painted with fine lines that shimmer in the sunlight. Curiosity pulls you along behind them. The crowd thickens as you approach the temple courtyard. The air here smells different: resin, smoke, and something faintly floral. The hum of quiet conversation fades into murmurs of prayer. You can feel reverence woven into every movement. A priest stands at the altar, his robe bright with pigment. Before him, clay pots line the stone steps, some filled with fragrant oil, others with honey, wine, or small bundles of grain. Offerings, each one chosen and contained in its humble earthen vessel. It's strange to think that the same hands that make breakfast pots also craft containers for the gods. The divide between the ordinary and the divine is thinner here than the thickness of fired clay. You watch as one worshiper bows low, setting down a pot of dates. Another places a small lidded jar filled with river water. The priest murmurs a blessing and lifts a vessel above his head, letting sunlight flash across its curved surface. The crowd breathes in unison, as though this simple motion carries the weight of eternity. The smell of incense rises, a heavy sweetness that coats your throat. You glance toward the side of the courtyard, where apprentices arrange stacks of newly made vessels. These aren't decorative, they're for temple stores. In the cool, dark chambers behind the altar, shelves of clay jars line the walls, each one marked with simple symbols to note what's inside: sesame oil, barley, dates, copper trinkets. The temple isn't just a place of prayer, it's a treasury, a bank, a warehouse, and a bureaucracy all at once. You follow the apprentices inside. The light dims, the air cools. Rows upon rows of jars stretch into the shadows, their rounded shapes repeating endlessly like echoes of devotion. The silence here feels sacred, but also practical. You realize the temple's god may be honored, but these stores are for people, to feed the priests, to sustain the city, to prepare for drought. Historians still argue whether the earliest temples were primarily spiritual centers or administrative hubs. But standing here, surrounded by so much clay, you can feel how the two roles merge. Worship and accounting share a wall, each pot both a prayer and an entry in a ledger. One young scribe crouches nearby, pressing a reed stylus into a small clay tablet. He's recording today's offerings: 5 jars of oil, 2 of honey, 1 of incense. His brow furrows in concentration, his tongue peeking slightly between his teeth. The soft clicks of his stylus are rhythmic, almost musical. He doesn't know it yet, but this act of pressing signs into wet clay will outlast him by thousands of years. When he finishes, he sets the tablet aside to dry and picks up another. You glance down at the markings. Tiny wedge shapes, ordered and neat. It's strange to think that writing, one of humanity's greatest inventions, may have been born not from poetry, but from pots, from the need to keep track of what goes in and out of temple storerooms. Bureaucracy, not beauty. Though, honestly, maybe they're the same thing in a different light. Outside again, the sun has climbed high, glaring off the pale mud brick walls. A procession approaches from the river, carrying larger pots now, massive urns sloshing with water and beer. Musicians follow, beating hand drums, flutes trilling faintly. The pots are painted with simple motifs, circles, waves, tiny animals. Each symbol tells a story, a wish for good harvests, a plea for protection, a thank you to unseen forces. The priest smiles, lifting his hands in welcome. The procession halts, and one by one the jars are set before the altar. You watch the liquid offerings pour out, dark streams splashing into a basin, steam rising as the sun hits it. The smell is sharp and yeasty, ancient beer, brewed in clay jars like these since the dawn of cities. One pot cracks slightly as it's set down, the faint sound lost beneath the drums. A young boy winces. His father pats his shoulder reassuringly. Cracks happen, even in offerings. The priest simply nods, murmurs something about imperfection being part of creation. You can't help but smile at that. Nearby, a potter sits quietly, observing the ceremony. His hands are still stained with clay, his tunic dusted with dried mud. When the priest finishes, the potter nods in satisfaction, as though confirming his work did its part. For him, the divine isn't distant, it's tangible, shaped, fired, and held. Every vessel he makes might one day carry something sacred, even if it's just soup on an ordinary evening. As the ceremony ends, people linger, chatting softly. The courtyard smells of incense and wet clay, a strange but comforting blend. Children chase each other between the empty jars. One trips and laughs. Life and worship blur together again, inseparable. Later that evening, you walk back toward the homes on the riverbank. The sun is setting, turning the water copper and the mud a deep red. You pass by several pots cooling beside the hearths, their surfaces catching the last of the light. They look almost alive, breathing warmth into the dimming day. You crouch near one and peer inside. It's filled with lentils, neatly stored for the next meal. Nothing grand, nothing divine, just sustenance. Yet somehow, after watching the day's offerings, even this humble kitchen pot feels sacred. It occurs to you that civilization itself might rest on clay. The quiet cooperation between household and temple, the rhythm of storage, offering, and exchange. Clay doesn't shout. It holds, contains, remembers. You glance up at the temple, glowing faintly in the distance against the purple sky. Smoke curls from its incense altar, drifting like a prayer that's forgotten its words. Somewhere between that smoke and this kitchen, between devotion and dinner, lies the heart of Mesopotamia. And as you settle by the fire, listening to the slow simmer of stew inside a pot that looks very much like the one at the temple steps, you realize something simple but profound. The sacred begins in the ordinary. A pot that holds barley by day can hold faith by night. Clay doesn't care what you fill it with. It just endures, quietly, waiting for the next story to be poured inside. The morning begins not with the smell of fresh bread or wet clay, but with the crunch of something sharp beneath your foot. You look down and see it, a fragment of pottery, its edges jagged, its surface etched with faint lines, now dulled by dust and time. A shard, nothing more. But as you bend to pick it up, it feels strangely heavy in your hand, as though it still carries a memory, or perhaps a whisper. You turn it over carefully. The curve suggests it was once part of a wide bowl. There's a faint spiral pattern on one side, the kind you saw back in the potter's quarter. You imagine the rest of it, graceful, symmetrical, useful. And now, just this sliver remains. It's humbling, really. Civilizations rise and fall, and what survives are the things that broke. You start to notice them everywhere. Shards half buried in the dirt, chips glinting in the sunlight, a scatter of fragments marking where a pot once fell, maybe 1,000, maybe 4,000 years ago. The ground itself seems layered with them, a quiet mosaic of human error and endurance. A boy passes by carrying water in a new jar, and for a fleeting moment you wonder how long before his, too, becomes part of this scattered puzzle. The pots may seem fragile, but in truth, they outlast flesh and wood and memory. They break, yes, but even broken, they persist. Nearby, a group of women are sorting through the debris of yesterday's market. A donkey had stumbled, sending a cartload of pots crashing to the ground. The remains lie in messy heaps. Some pieces will be discarded, others ground up and mixed into fresh clay to strengthen new pots. There's a kind of poetic recycling in that. Old vessels reborn in new forms, past lives baked into every jar. You pick up a larger fragment. Its inside still carries the ghost of blackened soot. It must have been a cooking pot. Maybe it simmered lentils for a family dinner. Maybe it boiled water for a feverish child. You'll never know, of course, but it's impossible not to wonder. Each crack feels like a question history never answered. Historians still argue whether the earliest broken pots were simply trash, or if some shards held ritual significance, used in ceremonies or buried deliberately. Archaeologists have found fragments tucked carefully under doorways, as if placed for protection, or perhaps as memory offerings for ancestors. Maybe people couldn't bear to part with the pieces that once fed them, warmed them, or held the offerings of their prayers. You walk toward the riverbank, where the silt shifts gently beneath your feet. There, in a shallow pit, a group of potters are sorting through discarded shards. One man picks up a rim piece, runs a thumb along its edge, and nods thoughtfully. "Good clay," he mutters, "still useful." He tosses it into a basket with others. Later, he'll crush them into fine grit, grog, to mix into fresh clay. Stronger pots, less cracking. Lessons learned from mistakes. It strikes you how different this attitude is from the modern one. In this world, nothing is simply thrown away. Even brokenness has value, utility, a kind of quiet redemption. Every flaw becomes instruction for the next creation. You can almost hear a moral forming at the back of your mind, that imperfection is not the end, only another beginning. As the day warms, you follow the potters to the outskirts of the village. There, beyond the walls, lies what you might call the ancient world's landfill, a dump for pottery too shattered to reuse. But it doesn't look like a pile of garbage. It looks like a record. Layers upon layers of fragments form a timeline, each stratum a whisper of a different generation. Archaeologists in your own age will dig here one day, peeling back time like sheets of parchment. They'll learn what these people ate, traded, stored, and sacrificed, all from shards, broken things telling whole stories. You crouch and lift another piece, this one painted with a delicate line of dark pigment, blue-gray against pale clay. The design looks almost modern. You trace the line with your finger and wonder about the artist who painted it. Did they ever imagine someone thousands of years later would be touching their work, imagining their face? Probably not. They just made a pot. But that's the secret of history. It doesn't ask for permanence. It rewards participation. A child approaches, watching you with curiosity. She holds out her own discovery, a piece of pottery shaped like a small human face. The features are crude but expressive. A tiny idol? A toy? The child shrugs when you ask, She just likes it. Her mother calls her away, and she runs off, leaving you with the fragment. Its eyes seem to meet yours for a moment before you set it gently back in the sand. Later, as evening draws near, you wander through the edge of a ruined temple, abandoned now, half buried in wind-blown silt. Potsherds litter the floor here too, some still bearing traces of incense or resin. You imagine the rituals that once filled this place, the murmured prayers, the flicker of oil lamps, the hands that offered, poured, blessed, and broke. Perhaps one of these jars cracked mid-ceremony, and the priest saw it as an omen. Perhaps they swept it aside and kept going, too practical for superstition. Either way, the fragments stayed behind, becoming the most faithful witnesses to what happened here. There's an old Mesopotamian proverb you recall, or perhaps invent in the haze of memory. The pot remembers the fire even after it cools. These shards remember too. Each bears the trace of the heat that hardened it, the fingerprints of the maker, the wear of the user, the violence of its breaking. In a way, every piece is a biography in miniature. You sit among them for a long while, letting the silence settle. A light breeze stirs the sand. Somewhere, a distant animal brays. The world feels suspended, as if waiting for something to be remembered. Then, out of nowhere, a small and very human sound, a sneeze. You turn to see a modern archaeologist, khaki hat, brush in hand, kneeling nearby in the same dust, thousands of years in the future. For a heartbeat, time folds. You can almost hear their excited murmur. Look at this pattern, probably Uruk period, maybe earlier. They'll photograph it, label it, ship it to a museum. You can imagine it behind glass, under a sign that reads, "Fragment of decorated bowl, c. 3200 BCE." People will walk past it in quiet awe, never knowing the smell of the clay, the weight of the pot, the warmth of the kiln. But that's all right. The shard's job is to survive, not to explain. You think back to the kiln fires and the laughter of the potters. You remember the fingerprints pressed into wet clay by children playing nearby. And now, all of that lives only in these pieces, broken, but somehow eternal. As night falls, the broken pots gleam faintly under the moonlight. They look almost like stars scattered across the earth, constellations of memory instead of sky. You pick one up, hold it close, and whisper something that sounds a little like gratitude. Because maybe, just maybe, the story of humanity is told not by what we build, but by what we break, and by how we keep those pieces, generation after generation, until they become the archaeology of us. You set the shard back in the dust, where it belongs. The morning sun shimmers on the slow-moving Euphrates, its surface the color of burnished bronze. You stand on the bank, watching small boats push away from the shore. Reed bundles tied together with rope, loaded high with clay jars that clink softly with each wave. The air smells of wet silt and distance, and the rhythmic creak of wooden paddles feels like the heartbeat of trade itself. You step aboard one of the boats, steadying yourself as it rocks. Around you, merchants and boatmen call out to one another in a chorus of instructions, laughter, and half-sung chants. Their cargo glows faintly in the sunlight, hundreds of pots filled with grain, beer, honey, and oil. It's an ordinary sight here, but extraordinary when you think about it. Clay, the same mud that once squelched beneath bare feet, is now the vessel of civilization's movement. A bearded man with arms like braided rope grins at you, offering a drink from a jug. You take it, lukewarm beer with a faint tang of clay and river. It tastes ancient, earthy, comforting. "Trade's good this season," he says proudly. "Eridu wants our oil, and Uruk pays well for barley." His hand pats one of the jars beside him with something close to affection. "Without these pots, we'd be rich in nothing but mud." He's not wrong. The entire network of Mesopotamian trade depends on pottery. Without it, there's no way to transport or store the goods that make cities thrive. You look around the boat, each jar tied down carefully with ropes, their mouths sealed with pitch and cloth to keep out water and insects. Each vessel is a promise of food to be delivered, of goods to be exchanged, of value preserved. As the boat drifts downstream, you pass other vessels heading north, some stacked with clay bricks, others with woven baskets of fruit, dried fish, copper, and linen. The river carries everything, and everything travels in clay. It's like watching the veins of a living body circulate blood. Civilization's pulse beats through these muddy waters. You crouch beside a pot and notice its shape differs from those in the villages upriver. The base is narrower, designed to fit snugly into boat racks. Its sides are smoother, more symmetrical. You realize the further these pots travel, the more refined they become, not out of vanity, but necessity. Design adapts to distance. Historians still argue whether pottery spread through trade routes or through migration of artisans. But as you float here, you can almost feel the answer. It's both. A pot carries not only goods, but ideas. Each time a trader arrives in a new city, a new shape, glaze, or symbol arrives with him. By midday, the boat pulls into a bustling river port. The dock is alive with motion. Workers shouting, donkeys braying, pottery clinking, grain spilling. You step onto solid ground, surrounded by rows of market stalls shaded with woven mats. The smell of clay dust mixes with fish, bread, and sweat. A potter's stall catches your eye. He's surrounded by stacks of finished vessels, some plain, some painted with delicate designs. His hands are quick, his wheels spinning smoothly as he shapes a new jar right there in front of the crowd. Local clay, he tells you proudly, from the river bend nearby, smooth, strong, good for firing. He gestures to a row of imported pots beside him. Those from nice to look at, but they crack easy, different soil. You examine the imported pots, slightly reddish, more polished, with thinner walls. You can tell they were made by different hands, different techniques. Clay remembers its birthplace, you realize. Even after being shaped, fired, and shipped, it carries the fingerprint of the earth it came from. A merchant beside you is negotiating with the potter. He gestures at several large amphorae. "I'll take 10 of those for oil." The potter shakes his head. "You'll break them on the road." They haggle for a while, laughter breaking through the tension. Trade is part performance, part endurance sport. You wander further into the market. Pottery of every kind surrounds you. Tiny perfume bottles, wide-mouthed storage jars, elegant cups with flared lips. Each type reflects its purpose and, by extension, the life of the people who use it. You see soldiers buying water flasks, priests selecting offering bowls, merchants inspecting wine jugs. Clay connects them all, a quiet democracy of necessity. You notice something else too. Decoration has changed. The pots here are covered in motifs you haven't seen before. Stylized fish, crescent moons, even clusters of dots that might represent stars. Every city along the river speaks in its own dialect of design. In Eridu, fish and waves. In bulls and horns. In Uruk, spirals and suns. You can almost read geography through pottery, tracing human movement like a map drawn in mud and fire. One pot in particular catches your eye. It's a large amphora painted with a series of boats drifting down a line that could only be the river itself. A pot depicting pots in boats, Mesopotamian inception. You chuckle softly, drawing a curious glance from the vendor. "Art," he says with a shrug, though his grin betrays pride. Later that afternoon, you follow a caravan leaving the port. The donkeys plod along dusty roads, their loads carefully balanced, pairs of jars swaying gently with each step. The sound is mesmerizing, the rhythmic clack of pottery and the low murmur of wind through reeds. You walk with them until the sun begins to set, painting the land in shades of red and bronze. The caravan stops for the night beside a small oasis. Fires flicker to life, and the merchants sit around them, sharing food and stories. One man pulls out a cracked jar and laughs. "She fell off the donkey this morning," he says, shaking his head. "Still holding together." Another replies, "That's what happens when you buy from Lagash. Uruk clay lasts longer." The debate that follows sounds less like trade talk and more like football fans defending their favorite team. As they eat, they drink from small clay cups, each chipped and stained from use. You can't help but notice that even here, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dust and distance, every sip, every bite, every offering depends on clay. It's as if the earth itself insists on participating in every meal. When the fires die down, the merchants sleep beside their wares. You lie awake for a while, staring at the stars reflected faintly in the river nearby. The pots gleam in the moonlight, their curved forms echoing the shapes of constellations above. You think of how these same vessels will travel far beyond this moment, some to new cities, some to temples, some to tombs. Some will break, of course. Others will survive, buried in layers of earth, waiting to be found by hands not yet born. The night air hums with insects, soft and persistent. You realize how deeply these people trust the clay they work with. They don't see it as fragile, but faithful. The pot may break, but the craft, the idea of shaping earth into something useful, never does. It just keeps moving, from one village to the next, from one set of hands to another, following the river's ancient rhythm. Tomorrow, this same current will carry new pots downstream. Maybe one will end up holding oil in a temple, another storing beer in a tavern, another, centuries later, resting behind glass in a museum. Each journey starts the same way, with mud, water, and patience. As you drift towards sleep beside the caravan's glowing embers, the thought feels oddly comforting. The clay that once stuck to your sandals is now the vessel that carries the world's memory. It travels farther than any traveler, lasts longer than any empire, and always, somehow, finds its way home to the river. The dawn breaks slowly over the horizon, painting the river in muted gold and copper hues. You awake to the smell of smoke, dry earth, and the faint tang of clay warming in the morning sun. Today, you realize, is not about carrying or shaping the mud. Today is about fire, about transformation. And transformation, you notice, is a quieter sort of magic, almost imperceptible, but powerful all the same. You follow a group of potters who have gathered near a kiln at the edge of the village. Its walls are thick, constructed from mud bricks mixed with straw, carefully dried and layered. The opening gapes like the mouth of a cave, dark and mysterious. Inside, a faint orange glow pulsates as embers lick the clay walls. The air vibrates softly with heat, carrying the faint aroma of resin and ash. You instinctively step back and feel the warmth brushing your face, almost like a whisper. The potters place their jars carefully inside the kiln, stacking them in precise arrangements. Not a single one is haphazard. They seem to understand, instinctively, that the slightest shift can spell disaster. You crouch beside them and watch as a thin reed is used to check spacing between vessels. "Too close," one mutters, and slides a jar a few centimeters over. These adjustments are small, almost imperceptible, but crucial. Fire, you realize, is both friend and adversary. Too slow, and the pots remain fragile, soft, and vulnerable to cracks. Too fast, and the clay literally explodes, shattering everything in the kiln. The potters speak in low tones, almost a chant, tending to the flames as if coaxing a living thing. They feed wood, adjust airflow, and cover gaps to control the heat. It is a dialogue, a negotiation with an element they cannot fully command. Historians still argue whether early Mesopotamian kilns were intentionally designed for uniform heat, or whether potters learned through trial and error over generations. Watching them, you suspect it was both. Innovation and observation dance together, shaping civilization as much as the clay itself. One potter, older than the rest, leans close to the kiln and presses a small reed against the wall. The clay vibrates faintly. He nods. "Just right," he whispers. You realize that this is a craft of patience, of listening. The clay is telling them when it's ready to change. Nearby, a young apprentice tips over a small pile of wood. Sparks fly, and he coughs. The master potter laughs softly. "Even fire needs a lesson sometimes," he says. It's a quiet joke, gentle, but it underscores a truth. Mastery over fire is never complete. It is respect, observation, and humility folded into every careful gesture. The kiln begins to sing. Low, rhythmic pops as moisture escapes from the clay. Soft cracks as vessels harden. You trace the patterns of light through the kiln's opening. The glow shifts, almost liquid in its movement, reflecting off the curved surfaces of the pots. You notice that the color of each vessel is slowly changing. Pale mud turning warm red, ochre, and bronze. Fire is painting without a brush, sculpting without hands. Some of the pots bear faint designs pressed into the surface, spirals, dots, zigzags. As the heat penetrates the clay, these designs become permanent, etched not just into mud, but into memory. You can't help but feel that each jar, each vessel, is a quiet chronicle of human life. The hands that pressed, carved, and shaped them centuries ago are now immortalized in fired earth. A sudden hiss of steam escapes from a partially wet jar. The apprentice flinches. The master potter simply adjusts a vent and murmurs, "Water will always test patience." The kiln continues its soft symphony, the temperature rising, the clay strengthening. You watch the transformation unfold, simple, elemental, and breathtaking in its quiet consistency. Across the courtyard, someone is preparing glaze for a few special vessels. They mix powdered minerals with water, applying thin layers to a small cup. You notice the subtle shimmer as it hits the sun, a promise of future color. In a few hours, the fire will bake it into permanence. The pot will be transformed again, not just hardened, but decorated. A mundane object will become beautiful, functional, and enduring. You wander among the drying pots nearby, imagining the life each will lead. Some will hold water for a family, others grain for storage, and still others will travel along the river to distant cities. You remember the riverboats, the bustling market, the temple. Every piece of clay carries the potential to participate in life far beyond its point of origin. Fire merely ensures it survives the journey. As the day stretches, the kiln seems to breathe along with you, its walls warm and alive. Sparks occasionally pop, smoke curls upward, and the soft crackle of clay hardening fills the courtyard. You can almost hear the vessels whispering to each other, small conversations about their past as mud and their future as something stronger. You notice a small pot that seems to be leaning slightly. The master potter picks it up, turns it carefully in the light, and sets it back into position. "Balance," he says simply, "not just for the kiln, but for life." You smile softly, amused and contemplative at once. Balance is everywhere, in the shaping of clay, the feeding of fire, and the careful navigation of existence. Nearby, a child laughs as she tips over a tiny, unfinished pot. The older potters glance up and then shrug. Mistakes, the master says. Even fire forgives if you respect it. The girl beams, retrieving the piece carefully. It will probably be crushed and mixed into new clay. Yet even in this small error, you can see the same lesson repeated. Imperfection is never the end, only the beginning of something new. By late afternoon, the heat of the kiln reaches its peak. The smoke curls high, drifting over the village. You sit nearby, letting the warmth seep into your bones. The sound of crackling, the glow of fire, the scent of baked clay. It's hypnotic. The world outside seems distant, irrelevant. Here, transformation is tangible, undeniable, and gentle in its insistence. You remember a quirky historical note. In some regions, potters would add crushed shells or plant fibers to clay to prevent cracking during firing. Some scholars still argue whether this was practical experimentation or a ritualistic practice meant to protect the pot. You smile at the thought. In this land, even science wears a hint of superstition. Evening begins to settle over the village. The kiln glows softly in the dimming light. Each vessel now strong, permanent, ready to serve the next part of its story. The apprentices carefully remove the finished pots, carrying them to shaded areas to cool. They set them down gently, as if laying newborns into cradles. The glow fades from their surfaces, replaced by the warm, solid presence of hardened earth. You sit back, watching the transformation complete. Fire has taken what was soft, malleable, and temporary, and rendered it durable, functional, and lasting. It's astonishing how something so ordinary can hold so much power, how heat and patience can shape not just mud, but the trajectory of human life. At the edge of the courtyard, the master potter sighs contentedly. He rubs his hands together, streaked with clay and soot, and watches the pots. "They will last," he murmurs. "Longer than we will, longer than any memory." You nod silently. In a strange way, the fire doesn't just harden clay, it preserves legacy, culture, and human intention. The night falls softly, and the kiln cools gradually. Shadows stretch across the courtyard, the air smelling faintly of smoke, baked earth, and river. You breathe deeply, feeling the rhythm of creation and transformation echo in your chest. The fire is dying down, but its work remains, permanent, quiet, and utterly enduring. You imagine archaeologists centuries from now uncovering these pots, still strong, still etched with patterns and fingerprints. They'll study them, catalog them, marvel at them. Yet they'll never fully experience the warmth of the kiln, the scent of mud and embers, or the gentle hum of hands shaping clay into life. Only you, for a fleeting moment, have witnessed the magic of transformation in real time. And as you lie down to rest, the day's lessons settle into your mind like the last glow of embers in the kiln. Patience, respect, impermanence, and the quiet, enduring power of fire to make something fleeting into something eternal. Morning arrives slowly, spilling pale light over the village like a soft curtain. You find yourself drawn once again to the potter's quarter, where the scent of damp clay and dust mixes with the sweet aroma of fresh bread cooling on stone slabs. Today, your attention is captured not by fire or trade, but by the slow, mesmerizing motion of the potter's wheel, the secret engine behind every curve, every bowl, every vessel that has ever held water, grain, or hope. The wheel sits in the center of the courtyard, simple but profound. A circular slab of clay or wood, spinning on a pivot, powered by hands or feet, yet capable of creating objects of perfect balance and subtle beauty. You kneel beside it, brushing dust from the surface, tracing the faint grooves left from countless rotations. The rhythm is hypnotic. Spin, shape, push, pull, breathe. You can feel time stretching and contracting as the wheel moves. A potter crouches nearby, her hands wet and coated with the smooth, dark clay. She presses a lump into the center of the wheel, steadying it with careful fingers. Centering, she murmurs, almost to herself. The term feels magical. To center the clay is to center the mind, the body, and, perhaps, in a quiet way, the universe. You watch as the wheel spins faster, the lump beginning to rise, stretching like a soft tower of earth. It wobbles, trembles, and yet, under her steady hands, it finds its perfect form. Historians still argue whether the wheel was originally a tool of convenience or a revolutionary technological leap. Some suggest it was first used for grinding grain, later adapted for pottery. Others believe potters invented it independently, seeking consistency in shape and speed. Either way, its introduction changed everything: production, trade, and daily life, all spinning outward from this simple pivot. The apprentice, a boy of no more than 10, crouches beside her, hands sticky with clay, watching intently. "You have to feel it," she tells him softly. "The clay tells you when to push, when to lift, when to stop." He mimics her movements, wobbling his tiny vase dangerously. A soft pop escapes from the wheel. A rim collapses, flattening into a sad disc. He groans. She laughs gently. Every collapse teaches something. You notice a subtle truth in her words. Pottery is less about perfection and more about attention, patience, and dialogue with the material. Each lump of clay is unique. Moisture, texture, temperature, all variables that refuse to obey a rigid plan. The wheel doesn't impose control, it facilitates conversation. Hands and clay converse in a language older than writing, as old as civilization itself. Across the courtyard, a group of women compare the curves of their bowls. One whispers to another about a tiny ripple along the rim. "Did you see that?" she asks. "It looks like a wave." The other smiles. "Or a river," she replies. You realize that even imperfections become poetry when observed gently. A misstep transforms into character, and the wheel, patient and impartial, bears witness. The wheel allows speed, too, a quiet, unassuming revolution. Where hand-building a jar might take hours, the wheel can produce multiple forms in the same time span. This efficiency doesn't just save labor, it enables trade, storage, and the slow expansion of cities. Imagine Eridu or Uruk without the wheel. Fewer jars, less grain stored, fewer offerings delivered. Civilization itself is spinning quietly here on this circular pivot. You lean closer to study the spinning clay. Its surface ripples in a subtle rhythm, catching the sunlight like water. You press a fingertip lightly against the wet surface and feel it respond, yielding, pliable, alive. It's intimate, this connection between human and earth. You can imagine 1,000 years from now, someone touching the same curves, marveling at the same smooth surfaces, unaware of the hands that shaped it or the rhythm of the wheel beneath. Nearby, the potter begins to add small designs. Faint lines pressed with the tip of a reed, shallow ridges created with a fingernail. They appear as the clay spins, almost hypnotically, each pattern a fleeting signature of the moment. Later, fire will make them permanent. But for now, they exist only in motion, only in attention, only in presence. You recall a quirky fact you once read. Some potters deliberately let the wheel wobble slightly while shaping, claiming it teaches humility to the clay. Scholars debate whether this was ritualistic, playful, or practical experimentation, but the idea amuses you. Perhaps the wheel is not just a tool, but a teacher, spinning lessons into the hands of every apprentice who dares to try. A child toddles by, eyes wide, spinning a tiny pot on a miniature wheel fashioned from wood. It wobbles precariously, collapses twice, and finally, after several attempts, a small bowl emerges. The child claps, delighted. Around the courtyard, laughter and soft chatter accompany the gentle rhythm of the wheels. Time slows here. You could stay in this soft hum indefinitely, spinning along with them. The master pauses, wiping sweat from her brow. She picks up a newly formed jar and lifts it to the light. It's symmetrical, elegant, and perfectly balanced. "It will hold water," she murmurs. "It will hold beer. It will hold memory." You nod, understanding the profundity in her simplicity. Every vessel carries more than its contents. It carries hands, time, and intention. You notice a pattern emerging across the courtyard. While individual vessels differ, the essence of their creation is shared. Rhythm, focus, patience, and a willingness to respond to feedback. The wheel democratizes the process in a subtle way. Apprentice, master, child, or elder, all are participants in the same dialogue between clay and hands, clay and mind, clay and the universe. Historians still argue whether the potter's wheel catalyzed the shift from village economies to urban civilizations, or whether it was merely a symptom of that transition. But watching the spinning clay, the answer feels intuitive. The wheel enables connection. It allows more clay to be shaped, more goods to be stored and traded, and more people to participate in sustaining life. Civilization moves, slowly but steadily, on circular momentum. As the sun rises higher, the courtyard glows golden. Wheels spin, vessels rise, collapse, and reform. Patterns ripple across surfaces. Hands smear, smooth, and pinch. The air is alive with concentration, laughter, and the faint, sweet scent of wet clay drying in sunlight. You lean back, letting the rhythm wash over you. For a moment, the world outside disappears. The river, the markets, the temples, even the passage of time itself. There is only spin, only clay, only presence. By midday, you notice a small revolution in miniature. The apprentice is shaping two small bowls simultaneously, one in each hand. His confidence has grown. His motions are smoother. Mistakes still happen, but each wobble is a lesson, each collapse a story. The wheel has become more than a tool. It is a teacher, a partner, a mirror. You rise and stretch, brushing clay from your palms. Around you, the courtyard continues its gentle choreography. The sound of wheels turning, pots forming, and hands shaping is hypnotic, a soft mantra of human ingenuity. Even centuries from now, these vessels will endure, holding water, grain, or even museum labels. The wheel may stop, the village may vanish, but the shape and balance it instilled into clay will persist. And as the day draws toward afternoon, you feel an intimate connection to the centuries of hands that have spun clay before you. Every rotation, every push and pull, every gentle correction has been repeated countless times, an unbroken thread of human presence. The wheel spins, softly and endlessly, whispering secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. The sun rises lazily over the trading quarter, bathing the narrow streets in soft gold. You follow the quiet hum of daily life, noticing how deeply clay has intertwined itself with commerce. Every shop, stall, and port bears witness to it. Clay jars, amphora, cups, and bowls form the silent backbone of trade, carrying more than goods. They carry trust, promise, and a kind of invisible contract between hands, rivers, and distant cities. You pass a merchant carefully loading a cart with small jars of oil. The wheels creak beneath the weight, and you can almost hear the whisper of the clay as each vessel nudges against its neighbor. It's a symphony of commerce in miniature, careful stacking, balancing, and securing of fragile lives in mud. The merchant glances up, wiping sweat from his brow, then smiles. Clay doesn't argue, he says, but it can punish. A soft chuckle escapes your lips. He's right. One slip, one bump, an entire day's profit could collapse in a clatter of shards. The market hums around you. Stalls display clay vessels of every kind, tiny cups for perfume, wide-mouthed bowls for grain, large amphora for liquids. Each shape signals purpose and intent. You watch a woman bargaining over 2 jars of beer, arguing that one has a thicker lip, better for pouring. She examines them meticulously, running a thumb along the rim, the texture speaking volumes. The vessels, though mute, guide the conversation, almost as if they have a voice of their own. You wander deeper into the market and come across a group of traders from Uruk. Their cargo consists of jars filled with fine oil and fragrant honey. Each vessel is sealed carefully, wrapped in cloth and pitch. You notice that the designs etched into their surfaces are distinct from the local pottery, spirals and crescents instead of simple lines and dots. The motifs indicate origin, identity, even a sense of prestige. Pottery here functions as branding long before logos existed. Historians still argue whether these designs were purely decorative or if they served as a kind of early trademark, signaling quality, origin, or ownership. As you watch the traders exchange nods and coins, you sense the answer is both. The patterns on clay are language, a subtle communication across distance and time, read not with words, but with eyes, experience, and intuition. You follow one trader as he carries a stack of small jugs to a dockside warehouse. The river glimmers nearby, the same Euphrates that carries pots downstream to waiting cities. Each vessel's journey is meticulously recorded by scribes with clay tablets, the earliest accountants of the ancient world. You watch a young scribe press his stylus into wet clay, cataloging the weight, type, and destination of each jar. The tablet, like the jar itself, becomes a vessel, this one for information, not oil or grain. A curious detail catches your eye. Some vessels are deliberately heavier, others slightly asymmetrical. You ask a merchant about it. He shrugs, a soft smile playing at his lips. Some buyers prefer heavier jars. They feel more valuable. Some prefer light. They are easier to carry downstream. It's all psychology. Clay doesn't judge. You laugh softly at the observation, realizing that commerce, much like pottery, is both practical and subtle, concrete and abstract. Nearby, children play with broken shards, stacking and balancing them like towers. One girl picks up a tiny fragment, painted with faint geometric lines. She turns it over, inspects it, then tosses it lightly into a basket. For the potter, she says, almost as if the fragment itself holds some residual dignity. Even in commerce, respect for the material lingers. Broken clay is recycled, repurposed, and respected, not discarded entirely. You pause at a stall where jars of varying sizes are displayed. Some contain grain, others liquids, and one curious vessel holds dried fish. A local merchant explains that clay preserves contents better than woven baskets or wooden containers. It's porous yet sturdy, capable of absorbing just enough humidity to prevent spoilage. The science feels intuitive, practiced over generations, a quiet wisdom written into the very walls of each vessel. Historians still argue how much Mesopotamian trade relied on pottery versus other containers. Some suggest that early trade could not have scaled without these clay vessels, while others argue that baskets and leather bags played equally vital roles. You watch the transactions unfold, and it seems almost certain. Pottery enabled commerce at a scale unmatched by other materials. Across the street, a temple official negotiates a delivery of clay jars intended for offerings. Each jar has been decorated, some with incised lines, others with painted symbols. Their function is ceremonial, yet they are still commodities, traded, weighed, transported, cataloged. Clay in Mesopotamia refuses to be constrained by a single purpose. It is practical, sacred, and economic all at once. The river calls your attention again. Boats laden with pottery drift lazily, rocking with a gentle rhythm. You imagine the same jars traveling far downstream, arriving in distant settlements where their contents will feed families, sustain rituals, and participate in new exchanges. Each vessel is a node in an intricate network, linking towns and cities through clay, water, and human hands. A trader shows you a small set of painted jars, their colors vibrant and unusual. For he says, they will pay more for decoration. You note that even within commerce, aesthetics matter. The human desire for beauty, for status, for individuality, rides silently atop utility. A well-painted jar is not only a vessel, it is a signal, a message, a story waiting to be read by those who know how. You meander past an apprentice learning the delicate art of sealing jars. They dip small bits of resin into heated clay lids, carefully pressing them in place. A mishap here could ruin both contents and reputation. Yet the process is mesmerizing in its precision. You realize that commerce in Mesopotamia was not only about quantity, but about care, attention, and human trust. As the sun climbs higher, you watch a merchant bargain with a priest over a dozen jars intended for temple offerings. The priest inspects each one meticulously, smelling the inside, tapping gently, checking weight. You notice the faint traces of oil on some rims, evidence that these vessels were tested and reused. Commerce here is not careless. It is layered, deliberate, and interconnected with ritual, daily life, and trust. By mid-afternoon, the market begins to quiet, the chatter softening as buyers complete their exchanges. You pause to reflect on what you've seen. Clay is more than mud, more than pottery. It is the connective tissue of Mesopotamian society. Through commerce, through ritual, through daily use, clay carries value, identity, and memory. A jar is not simply a vessel. It is a participant in the economy, a silent witness to negotiation, trust, and human intention. A gentle breeze stirs, bringing the faint scent of the river and the dust of the marketplace. You watch the merchants pack their remaining jars for evening transport, the last of the sun glinting off painted surfaces. Even broken pots are gathered for reuse, crushed into new clay, their legacy folded into the next generation of vessels. You smile at the thought. In Mesopotamia, nothing is truly lost. Every fragment, every jar, every spin of the potter's wheel participates in a continuum of trade, life, and memory. By the time evening settles, you feel the pulse of commerce through the clay beneath your fingers, in the subtle weight of every jar, in the rhythm of water and riverboats. It is steady, quiet, persistent, the heartbeat of civilization itself, flowing in mud, fire, and hands that never tire of shaping the world. Twilight drifts slowly over the village, painting the clay walls of houses and the riverbanks in a soft, rosy hue. You follow the faint scent of incense and baked earth, realizing that today is not about trade, fire, or shaping, but about the quiet, persistent presence of ritual. Clay, you begin to notice, is as sacred as it is practical, a bridge between the earthly and the divine. You enter a temple courtyard where priests and priestesses move with measured grace. Their hands are adorned with simple rings, some with faint traces of clay dust from previous ceremonies. The air is thick with the smell of resin, herbs, and smoke curling from small fires in shallow vessels. All around you, clay jars sit carefully arranged, each one filled with offerings, oil, grain, honey, and even small painted figurines. These vessels are not merely containers, they are sacred participants in the ritual, holding not just material goods, but intentions, prayers, and devotion. A priest lifts a large, round pot filled with water from the river. Its surface reflects the last light of day, the orange and pink glinting against polished clay. The priest whispers a chant, dipping his fingers into the water and then brushing them across the rim. You notice the subtle vibration of the jar as it carries the gesture. Even inert clay seems to respond, transforming from object into symbol, from vessel into actor in a quiet spiritual drama.
Historians still argue whether certain Mesopotamian pottery was created exclusively for ritual purposes, or whether everyday vessels were repurposed in ceremonial contexts. Some jars show extraordinary craftsmanship, delicate shapes, painted motifs, or carefully inscribed cuneiform, while others are simple and utilitarian. You stand among both, sensing that intention matters more than ornamentation.
Nearby, a young apprentice balances a tiny offering bowl in her hands. She places it carefully on a low altar beside a larger jar, then steps back, bowing slightly. The bowl is filled with grain, each kernel representing abundance, continuity, and human gratitude. You notice the careful attention to proportion, weight, and placement. The ritual is as much about precision as it is about devotion. A curious detail captures your attention along their rims or sides. These marks, you learn, are deliberate. Tiny openings meant to release smoke, liquid, or aroma gradually during a ritual. They serve a practical purpose, but also carry symbolic weight, releasing prayers, intentions, or blessings into the air. It strikes you as beautiful and oddly comforting. Clay, so humble, yet capable of such spiritual resonance. You watch a procession of worshippers carrying jars through the courtyard. Some are filled with water, some with oil, and a few with small figurines. Their movements are slow, reverent, almost hypnotic. Each step resonates with intention. Each jar, no matter how plain or elaborate, participates in the ritual, linking the mundane act of carrying clay with the divine act of offering. Historians still debate the symbolism of certain motifs painted on ceremonial pots, whether spirals represent water, fertility, or cycles of life. As you study a jar adorned with concentric circles, you realize the question may not matter. What matters is the act itself. Humans interacting with Earth, shaping it, offering it, and in doing so, connecting to something larger than themselves. A soft laugh breaks the rhythm. A priestess helping a child place a small vessel on the altar. The child has chosen a tiny pot shaped like a human figure. Its features are rudimentary, but the care with which the child holds it is profound. The priestess whispers gently, "Even small offerings are seen." The simplicity is humbling. Even clay, molded by tiny hands, carries meaning. Nearby, a man carefully cracks a small pot as part of a ritual of renewal. Its contents, grain and water, spill onto the altar, a symbolic gesture of letting go, of returning what is borrowed to the divine. You remember the broken shards scattered along the riverbank, the recycling of old vessels, and realize that ritual and practicality are intertwined. Breaking clay is not just destruction, it is transformation, a return to earth, a lesson in impermanence. You notice that some pots are designed specifically for burial or consecration. They are smaller, simpler, often unglazed, and placed carefully beside human remains. Some are filled with food, others with small tokens. Archaeologists in your time will debate whether these practices were purely symbolic or served practical purposes. Perhaps it is both. Clay as sustenance and memory, body and spirit, utility and symbol. The ritual continues as night falls. Torches flicker, casting warm, dancing light across the courtyard. Shadows stretch along walls and across the smooth surfaces of jars, creating patterns that mimic the moon's reflection on water. You feel the weight of centuries pressing softly around you. The countless hands that shaped, carried, filled, and revered these vessels. The continuity is profound. Every ritual a conversation across generations, spoken in mud and fire and devotion. You crouch beside a small decorated bowl, noting its imperfections. A tiny chip on the rim, a faint ripple along the side. Yet its presence is deliberate. The imperfection itself seems meaningful, almost sacred, reminding you that ritual embraces human fallibility. These jars carry the lives of makers, users, and worshippers, all embedded in clay. A soft wind stirs, carrying the scent of incense and baked earth. You notice how the jars resonate slightly, faintly humming, as if acknowledging the prayers. You recall a quirky historical observation. Some scholars have suggested that certain Mesopotamian pots were used as musical instruments, struck gently during ceremonies to produce tones that accompanied chants. Whether that's true or not, the thought feels plausible. The material is alive with possibility. A small child approaches the altar with a handful of crumbs, carefully depositing them into a tiny vessel. The gesture is innocent, simple, yet profound. Clay holds intention, memory, and devotion. You realize that every jar, every bowl, every cup in this courtyard is participating in a silent, eternal conversation between human hands and the unseen. As the night deepens, the temple quiets. Only the faint hum of the river outside, the soft crackle of the torch flames, and the gentle, enduring presence of clay remain. You stand for a long moment, imagining the countless rituals that have unfolded here and elsewhere in Mesopotamia over millennia. Every jar, every shard, every kiln-fired vessel participates in these ceremonies, invisible yet indispensable. You think back to the river, the markets, and the potter's wheel. Clay is everywhere, practical, sacred, fragile, and durable. It carries commerce, food, water, and memory. And in ritual, it carries devotion, prayer, and a quiet, persistent acknowledgement of human mortality and hope. These vessels are both ordinary and extraordinary, mundane and magical. The moon rises above the temple, casting silver light across the courtyard. Shadows deepen, and the jars reflect the glow softly, like miniature moons themselves. You breathe deeply, feeling the calm settle in your chest. The clay has spoken to you today, softly and insistently, about patience, reverence, and the continuity of human life. Even broken, scattered, or buried, it remains a witness, a participant, and a teacher. By the time you leave, carrying the memory of incense, ritual, and the gentle hum of clay, you understand something quietly profound. The sacred does not always require gold, silver, or marble. Sometimes it only requires mud, water, hands, and intention. Clay participates in life, in commerce, in devotion, in memory. And that participation is enduring, intimate, and quietly extraordinary. Morning sunlight spills over the horizon, casting long, soft shadows across the riverbanks. You walk along the edge of the Euphrates, feeling the cool, damp clay underfoot. Today, your attention drifts beyond the villages, markets, and temples, beyond Mesopotamia itself. Clay, you realize, is not bound to one city, one river, or one culture. It moves, migrates, and inspires, traveling with humans across continents, carrying ideas, techniques, and stories. You imagine a caravan leaving laden with jars, amphorae, and fine bowls. Each vessel is carefully stacked, its shape and design reflecting not just function, but identity. These pots are destined for trade routes that extend far beyond familiar borders to distant cities and emerging settlements. Clay, in its quiet, humble way, becomes a messenger. It tells others who you are, what you produce, and what you value, long before words can be exchanged. Historians still argue about how quickly pottery techniques spread across regions. Some claim that artisans traveled widely, teaching their craft. Others suggest that imitation and observation alone were sufficient. You can see both possibilities unfolding. One potter might journey hundreds of miles, sharing his skills, while another city might simply experiment, inspired by a similar vessel observed during trade. Clay carries both the tangible and the intangible. Along a winding trade route, you pass towns where local clay differs in color and texture. Red, brown, ochre, and pale cream all carry distinct mineral signatures, subtle fingerprints of geography. Traders recognize these differences immediately. A jar from has a certain density and hue. A vessel from Lagash feels slightly softer. One from Kish carries a faint shimmer. Every shipment of clay vessels is a tactile map of the world, a record of the earth itself. You pause to watch a merchant inspect a shipment of amphorae. He taps each jar gently, listening to the sound of hollow resonance. Too thick here, too thin there, he murmurs. But overall, excellent. These will survive the journey to Dilmun. You realize that even in commerce, there is a kind of geography encoded in clay, a language of material knowledge understood intuitively by those who work with it. Some pots bear motifs that hint at cultural exchange. Spirals from Uruk appear in the markets of Kish. Fish motifs from Eridu show up in distant settlements. You notice a small jar decorated with crescent moons and dots, a hybrid of Mesopotamian and Levantine patterns. It seems almost playful, like a secret message to future hands. Humans connect, collaborate, and adapt, even when empires rise and fall. You walk further, imagining how clay vessels carried more than food or water. They transported knowledge. A distant pot might inspire new designs, firing techniques, or ritual uses. A trader might comment, "They fire these thinner in Dilmun. It lasts longer for oil," passing along an observation that becomes embedded in local practice. Clay is a teacher, quietly shaping civilizations from city to city. Across the river, children play with fragments of imported pottery, building towers and pretending they are boats, temples, or houses. You smile. Even broken clay retains influence, repurposed in daily life and imagination. Archaeologists will later find these fragments, trying to decipher what was functional, what was decorative, what was accidental, and what was deliberate. The shards carry stories, fractured, yes, but persistent across time. Historians still debate whether long-distance trade in pottery was primarily economic or cultural. Did people carry vessels to sell goods or to spread ideas? Perhaps you think it was always both. A jar that crosses continents carries sustenance in one hand and inspiration in the other. It is humble yet profoundly effective. You notice a peculiar jar, its shape slightly conical, decorated with unusual geometric patterns. A merchant explains it came from Susa, far to the east. They fire their clay differently, he says, stronger, but harder to decorate. The jar's design is unfamiliar, yet functional, a lesson in adaptation. You see how necessity and ingenuity intertwine across distance. Human hands meet local earth, negotiating limitations, discovering new possibilities. A riverboat drifts into view, stacked with imported pottery. You climb aboard, brushing dust from the deck. The smell of wet clay mingles with the fragrance of goods from afar, dried fruit, copper, and woven textiles. The boat glides along gently, carrying its precious cargo toward another settlement. Every jar is a silent ambassador of its place of origin. Along the voyage, you consider how climate, soil, and water quality influence the characteristics of clay. Some regions yield malleable, easy-to-shape material. Others produce dense, resilient clay ideal for large storage jars. Artisans adapt accordingly, learning from mistakes, observing others, and gradually refining their craft. Knowledge migrates as effectively as the vessels themselves. You pause to watch a sunset reflecting off the river, the light glinting on a row of jars balanced carefully on the deck. In this moment, you see clay as a constant traveler, a quiet witness to human ambition, curiosity, and movement. It crosses deserts, rivers, and mountains, carrying not just goods, but the essence of culture, artistry, and necessity. A small, playful observation enters your mind. In some regions, potters would disguise imperfections with painted patterns, turning flaws into stories. Scholars still debate whether this was aesthetic, symbolic, or purely practical. You smile, imagining future hands learning to innovate, turning mistakes into expression. A lesson in resilience passed along by mud and fire. By evening, the boat docks at a distant city. Merchants unload jars carefully, stacking them in a warehouse with the same meticulous attention you've witnessed throughout the day. The patterns, shapes, and weights are inspected and noted. Each vessel is cataloged, counted, and assigned a role in the next cycle of human interaction: consumption, storage, ritual, or trade. You notice that the imported jars do not merely replace local production, they influence it. Artisans begin experimenting with new shapes, firing methods, and decorations inspired by foreign examples. Clay serves as a medium for cross-cultural dialogue, a physical manifestation of learning, imitation, and creativity. As the night settles, you wander along the riverbank, thinking about all the places clay has been today: Lagash, Kish, Susa, Dilmun, and countless unnamed villages. Each journey is long and slow, but persistent. Clay travels quietly, steadily, silently witnessing the flow of human life across continents. Every vessel is both a product and a participant, carrying food, water, stories, knowledge, and intention across time and space. You take a deep breath, feeling the cool night air carry the faint scent of baked mud and distant fires. Clay, you realize, is more than material. It is memory, diplomacy, and subtle education rolled into one humble, resilient package. It survives empires, weather, and human hands, patiently recording the movement, taste, and imagination of countless people. And as the stars begin to appear, mirrored faintly in the river, you notice how a single jar can embody 1,000 stories, journeys, rituals, mistakes, successes, innovations, and the simple persistence of human life. Clay travels across continents not merely as a vessel, but as a quiet, enduring witness to civilization itself, connecting distant lands and distant people through its soft, malleable, yet enduring presence. The day begins quietly, with sunlight spilling softly over the mud brick homes of the village. You follow the gentle murmur of life, chickens clucking, water being poured, children laughing, and clay underfoot still damp from last night's river mist. Today, you realize, is about the subtle ubiquity of clay in daily life. Not the grand temples, not the river trade, not even the skilled wheel, but the ordinary, essential ways it shapes existence. You pause at a small courtyard where a woman is kneading dough in a wide, shallow clay bowl. Her hands move rhythmically, flattening, folding, and turning the wheat. The bowl bears faint scars from years of use, small chips along the rim, soft indentations in its interior. You notice how it seems almost to conform to her hands, the shape worn and molded by countless mornings like this. It's functional, yes, but intimate too. A silent companion in domestic life. Nearby, a child drinks water from a small clay cup. The liquid glints in the morning sun. You observe the way the cup warms slightly in the child's hands, how it feels heavier, more substantial, more comforting than a simple wooden or reed vessel would. You can almost see the imprint of past owners, the layers of history embedded in its fired walls. Clay is a witness here as much as it is a tool. Historians still debate exactly how widespread household pottery was in early Mesopotamian settlements. Some argue that small villages relied mostly on organic containers like baskets and gourds, while urban centers had the resources and labor to sustain pottery production. But walking through this courtyard, watching these everyday interactions, it's clear pottery was deeply embedded in the rhythms of life, even in places where resources were limited. You wander further and notice a woman carefully pouring water from a jar into a basin for washing. The jar's wide mouth allows her to control the flow, the handle worn smooth from decades of use. Even in such a mundane task, the jar is crucial. Without it, life would be slower, messier, more laborious. Clay, in its simplicity, enables civilization to function with efficiency, elegance, and care. A small dog trots past, brushing against a stack of shallow bowls drying in the sun. The bowls are for daily meals: bread, grain, water, and occasionally oil. Each bowl is slightly different, one taller, one wider, one with a faint ripple along the rim. You smile at the subtle individuality, realizing that even in utility, beauty and variation persist. Humans shape clay, but clay shapes experience in return. A quirky detail draws your attention. Some households store small amounts of honey in tiny, unglazed vessels, placed upside down to prevent ants from crawling inside. Scholars still argue whether this was a standard practice or a local innovation, but the ingenuity is clear. Even simple clay vessels are problem solvers, adapting to human needs with subtle, elegant solutions. You notice that storage jars dominate the courtyards. They are heavy, sturdy, and often capped with clay lids sealed with pitch or cloth. Grain, oil, and water all rest in these vessels, protected from pests and the elements. Clay functions as both container and guardian, quiet yet indispensable. Without these jars, food might spoil, water might evaporate, and daily life would become unpredictable and chaotic. Children gather around a broken pot, stacking its shards to create a miniature fort or toy. You watch them for a moment, realizing that clay teaches subtly, even in play. It's tactile, forgiving, and resilient. Broken vessels are recycled, not discarded. Mistakes are educational. Accidents are opportunities, and the earth itself becomes a playground for learning. A man pours water from a large amphora into a cooking pot, preparing a midday meal. The amphorous walls are thick and sturdy, designed for transport and long-term storage, yet versatile enough for domestic use. You observe the slight residue of river minerals clinging to the interior, evidence of its journey. Even in everyday tasks, the story of movement, trade, and survival is embedded in the clay. Historians still debate whether certain household vessels were standardized or if they were individually crafted for each home. Walking through these courtyards, you see evidence of both. Some pots are uniform, functional, and utilitarian. Others bear idiosyncratic touches, tiny decorations, handprints, or slight curves. The combination of standardization and personal expression mirrors the balance of efficiency and humanity in daily life itself. You follow a woman as she fetches water from a nearby river, carrying a small rounded pot on her hip. The vessel sways gently, perfectly balanced. She dips it carefully, scoops water, and walks back to her home. You notice the way the pot's weight and shape dictate her movements, how intimately human motion and clay are intertwined. Even the mundane act of carrying water becomes a choreography dictated by the properties of the vessel itself. Nearby, someone grinds grain using a pestle and mortar, pouring the flour into a clay jar afterward. The jar's wide mouth allows easy transfer, its walls thick enough to survive minor knocks. Even in labor, clay participates quietly, facilitating efficiency, patience, and rhythm. Without it, basic survival tasks would be slower, messier, and far less reliable. You stop to examine a small pot decorated with painted dots and lines. A scholar might argue whether this ornamentation is purely decorative or symbolic, whether it carries a message understood only by its maker. Either way, it demonstrates the human desire to imbue even mundane objects with meaning, turning clay from a simple tool into a canvas for personal expression and cultural identity. Children run past you, laughing, carrying tiny clay cups and imitating adults. Their play mirrors the activities of the larger world: cooking, trading, pouring, stacking. Clay is both participant and teacher, shaping behavior, imagination, and understanding. Every interaction, domestic, playful, or ritualistic, relies on its quiet reliability. As the afternoon sun softens, you notice that the courtyard is alive with clay's presence. Cups for drinking, bowls for food, jars for storage, small figurines for play or devotion. It is inescapable, intimate, and enduring. Clay is not merely a material, it is infrastructure, pedagogy, and companion, woven into the very texture of daily life. By evening, families gather for their meal. Jars of grain, bowls of water, and cups of beer sit in careful arrangements. Every vessel is functional, yet each carries subtle traces of personality and history. The chipped edges, faint fingerprints, and painted motifs testify to hands long gone and hands still active. You feel the rhythm of life flowing through these vessels, ordinary yet extraordinary, ephemeral yet durable. You pause to consider the quiet persistence of clay. It enables sustenance, protects nourishment, facilitates domestic labor, and inspires play and creativity. It bears witness to rituals, trade, and communication. Most importantly, it is present in the small, unnoticed rhythms that make life manageable, human, and comforting. The night settles, soft and cool. The clay in the courtyards, now dusted with evening dew, rests quietly. You can almost hear the gentle echo of all the hands that have shaped, carried, filled, and cherished these vessels across the centuries. Clay is ubiquitous, yes, but also intimate, a silent participant in daily life, quietly shaping routines, memories, and generations. The last rays of sunlight stretch lazily across the river, brushing golden light over mud brick homes, bustling markets, and the soft curves of countless clay vessels. You walk slowly through the quieting village, aware that today is about reflection, about tracing the enduring legacy of clay, not merely as material, but as witness, participant, and silent chronicler of human life. Every jar, bowl, and amphora has a story to tell, if you only pause to listen. You approach the remains of an old kiln at the edge of town. Its walls are worn, some bricks missing, but the faint warmth still lingers in the air. The smell of baked earth and faint smoke drifts gently, and you inhale deeply, feeling centuries of practice, patience, and creation settle into your chest. Here, clay is both object and memory, hardened by fire, yet soft with accumulated history. You touch a small shard lying at your feet. It is cool now, but you imagine the hands that once molded it, shaped it, and fired it into permanence. Historians still argue about how much Mesopotamian clay traditions influenced surrounding regions. Some argue that neighboring cultures developed pottery independently. Others suggest that Mesopotamian techniques, designs, and even ritual uses spread widely, leaving a subtle but indelible mark. You look at the shards scattered across the ground and realize the debate, while important academically, misses the obvious. Clay transcends borders. It travels, teaches, and adapts silently, carrying stories across time and space. Nearby, a child collects broken fragments, carefully arranging them into small towers. You smile softly, watching her transform broken pieces into playful structures. Even in its fractured state, clay remains functional, instructive, and enduring. It is never wasted, never meaningless. You recall similar scenes from earlier sections. The child who stacks shards in the market, the apprentice experimenting with collapsed pots, the tiny offerings on temple altars. Across contexts, clay teaches the same lesson: persistence, patience, and the quiet value of transformation. In the marketplace, merchants once argued over jars, inspecting their thickness, texture, and origin. Now, the echoes of commerce linger only faintly, but the vessels remain. Grain was stored, oil was transported, beer was poured, all within the unassuming walls of fired earth. Clay enabled trade, stability, and sustenance. Without it, the pulse of everyday life, domestic, economic, ritual, would have been slower, more precarious, less predictable. You move toward a small altar, still adorned with vessels used for offerings. Though dust settles upon them, their presence is almost reverent. Clay, you realize, is a bridge between worlds: the living and the dead, the mundane and the sacred, the known and the imagined. It carries water, food, and grain, but also prayers, devotion, and human intention. In its silent endurance, clay immortalizes both daily life and aspirations. A particularly worn bowl catches your eye, its rim chipped, its glaze faded. Yet, in its imperfections, there is character. The maker's hand is evident in the faint fingerprints, the subtle asymmetry, the curve of its walls. You realize that clay preserves humanity itself, not merely as material, but as gesture, care, and attention. Every imperfection becomes a trace of life, a small echo of those who shaped and used it. Historians still debate how far back Mesopotamian pottery influenced symbolic practices in the wider region. Some suggest that certain motifs, like spirals, crescents, and dots, traveled through trade networks, inspiring rituals elsewhere. Others believe that each culture developed motifs independently, finding universal inspiration in nature and human imagination. You look at the vessels around you and think perhaps it doesn't matter. Patterns, symbols, and techniques all testify to ingenuity, patience, and the shared human desire to leave a mark. As dusk deepens, you wander past households, imagining daily life. Children drinking water from clay cups, women kneading dough in shallow bowls, men storing grain in amphora. Clay is everywhere, quietly facilitating survival, memory, and culture. It structures routines, protects food, and shapes experience. Even as empires rise and fall, these vessels endure, carrying both substance and story. You recall the riverboats, the caravans, and the trade routes. Jars and amphorae traveled long distances, carrying not only goods but also ideas, techniques, and cultural markers. The clay vessels were ambassadors, bridging cities, regions, and civilizations. Each jar transported more than grain or water. It transported knowledge, practice, and identity. A gentle breeze stirs, carrying the faint scent of earth and water. You pause to reflect. Clay is persistent, adaptable, and versatile. It survives fire, fracture, and flood. It is shaped by human hands, yet it teaches, resists, and transforms. It embodies domestic life, ritual, commerce, and cross-cultural exchange. It is simultaneously humble and extraordinary. Nearby, a child carefully sets a small clay figure beside a pot, mimicking the rituals you observed in temples earlier. You watch quietly, smiling at the continuity of human behavior. Clay teaches through observation, imitation, and interaction. Even as empires vanish, even as markets close and trade routes shift, the lessons embedded in mud and fire persist. In the fading light, you imagine archaeologists centuries from now uncovering these pots. They will study the shapes, decorations, and fingerprints, trying to reconstruct daily life, trade practices, and spiritual habits. Yet they will never fully experience the warmth of the kiln, the smell of wet clay, or the soft rhythm of hands shaping vessels. Only you, in this quiet moment, have glimpsed the intimate pulse of civilization through the lens of fired earth. The courtyard grows silent. You linger, feeling the weight of history, craft, and continuity pressing gently around you. Every shard, every jar, every fragment is both object and testimony. Clay is functional, yes, but it is also memory, culture, and subtle pedagogy. It teaches patience, ingenuity, humility, and resilience. It carries human intention across time, silently enduring long after individual lives have faded. As night settles fully, the stars glimmer above the river, and the village rests in quiet, soft shadows. Clay remains, quietly present, a participant in all things, domestic, commercial, ritual, and imaginative. You feel a profound calm, knowing that this humble material, shaped by human hands and fired by earth and fire, has carried civilization itself, bearing witness to countless lives and journeys. The river reflects the stars, and the kilns lie dormant, their embers cooled, but their work complete. Clay has transformed mud into vessels, ideas into objects, and fleeting moments into lasting testimony. You inhale deeply, feeling a gentle reassurance. Though civilizations rise and fall, clay endures, quiet, patient, and enduring, whispering lessons in resilience, creativity, and care. And as you prepare to leave, the village now silent except for the faint rustle of leaves, you carry with you the full understanding of its quiet legacy. Clay is not just material. It is memory, utility, artistry, and witness. It is mundane and sacred, functional and beautiful. It is life, distilled into earth, water, and fire, and it is eternal. Slowly, you let the pace of the day slip away, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath your feet and the lingering aroma of baked clay in the air. Every vessel you've touched, observed, or imagined is now resting, just as the village rests, bathed in soft moonlight. The river murmurs quietly, carrying gentle reflections across the landscape, as if whispering the stories you've witnessed to the faraway stars. You breathe in the calm, letting your mind drift with the rhythm of centuries. The jars, bowls, and amphorae, now motionless, seem to hum with the faint echo of hands shaping them, of water poured, grain stored, and prayers offered. Their stories unfold slowly, softly, carrying traces of daily life, commerce, ritual, and imagination. You feel the quiet continuity, the human desire to create, preserve, and participate in something larger than oneself. It's all here, in the simple, enduring presence of clay. Allow your thoughts to soften, stretching long and slow, like the final glow of embers in a cooling kiln. Every crack, every fingerprint, every painted line whispers lessons in patience, resilience, and quiet ingenuity. Even broken shards carry meaning, teaching that imperfection is not the end, but a transformation. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the tranquility settle fully. You've walked alongside civilizations, traced the pulse of daily life, and witnessed the gentle, persistent power of clay to shape and preserve human experience. Let the softness of this journey carry you into dream, where vessels hold water, grain, memory, and the enduring hum of life itself. End of script. Sweet dreams.